to Mark Serrano, the former Bush Quayle advisor. Mark, you argue you just have to be careful with this stuff. Obviously, all of these are gut-wrenching admissions, but they come at a time when a lot of people cynically believe, oh, it's all staged. What do you think?
There's a lot of risk with it, Neil, because these are unguarded moments. You know, we went through decades and decades where most of what we saw of candidates was prepackaged. Nowadays, with social media and with video distribution, that one clip from Governor Christie got 5.5 million views online. You know, and on top of that, these long format settings of town hall meetings create a lot more opportunity for unguarded moments. And so what we see is something raw, something real. I think what we're seeing is factual and genuine, and that's very, very important when telling stories like this and sort of bearing your soul, because it connects with people. People can relate to it, but there is some risk to it. It can fall flat. It can be, for instance, Jeb Bush this week with his Fix-It tour, he was telling some jokes that completely fell flat and tone deaf.
Well, I do think that Christie stood out to me as being a little bit more genuine in the respect that he stepped back and as a party made a statement that we, of course, have a right to life. We want to protect that child in the womb for 9 months, but afterwards we tend to forget about it. Whether that child grows up to be a drug addict or a business executive and hotshot lawyer dependent on Percocet, then we don't really say much about it. And I thought that was very thematic, very, very powerful, and it was in response to a question and not so much a pre-delivered event. But I think that's why that one went particularly viral, because people stepped back and said, he has a point. It's a powerful point. But can you overdo that sort of thing?
There's definitely a risk of that. You can overdo it, especially if it becomes a part of your stump speech as opposed to something that's just natural in an unguarded moment when you're having a dialogue at a big town hall meeting or in a more intimate setting up in New Hampshire. Keep in mind, New Hampshire especially, but many of these states rely on retail politics for voters to get to know the candidates. That's gone on for a long time, but now we're seeing a lot of soul bearing. And you're right. It's just it can be overdone. It can be over the top. It can come across as disingenuine, seeking votes. But I give Jeb Bush credit. If you take a look at this interview with him that publihed today,
talking about his daughter, and all that's very revealing. That's very revealing.
That's the Jeb Bush we haven't seen before.
But someone who's doesn't strike me as a very emotional or is a tearful guy.
He's
or
not
Charlie
an emotional
Gasparino.
guy.
Well, Charlie Gasparino, who's not ever going to run for president, I pray.
Thank goodness.
But he did raise a very good point with me earlier today that enough already. We don't want to hear you guys whining or sharing your deepest, darkest moments. That's all well and good. We want to know what you're going to do to improve this economy, to get us out of this sort of subpar recovery, and save the tears for the important moments. What do you think of that?
With most candidates, Charlie's right. Most candidates should not take that risk because it's not going to be genuine. What they should be talking about is what matters to voters, not as much their own personal experience. It's funny. George Bush 41 used to call it psychobabble, if you recall.
Yes, I remember.
Right? And he just didn't want to get into personal revelations or talking from the heart.
Well, that was part of the generation too that just didn't.
Definitely. World War II generation. They didn't talk as emotionally. I think Charlie's right for most candidates. But Chris Christie got away with it. And he meant it. It was genuine. It was real. But I think for most, it will come off as canned, prepackaged, and they should not take that risk. So this is really just on select cases where the timing is right, the story is right, so that people can sort of get a look inside of the candidate, what forms their views and forms their personality. But, I agree with Charlie in this case. It's a big risk, and a lot of candidates should not take that risk.
Yeah, I think what made Christie's riveting, at least to me, was that it was making a bigger metaphor and a bigger statement about where as a party you are and where as human beings you are, and there was no vested interest or particular family issue to raise there. But I could be wrong. I'm no political
kind of like Carly
pundit.
Fiorina and the Planned Parenthood issue in the one debate where she said, what are we as a nation, as a people? What do we stand for?
You've got to make that connection for people. To tug on their heartstrings without a greater message sometimes misses the entire point.
Got to be a good storyteller.
And not like Charlie Gasparino. All right. Thank you, buddy. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Neil.